Okay, so what's the economist's argument? The economist's argument is that basically the news coverage of the economy is irrelevant to the way that people behave, because their behavior is more so tied to their own personal, or how they perceive their own personal economic situation, than what they see on the news. But how do you know that they're not judging their own personal economic situation based on what they see in the news? So that's one flaw. Another flaw could be let's see, what else could be a flaw? Economic situations. Okay, that's the only flaw that I can kind of predict. It fails to consider the possibility that people's confidence in their own immediate economic situation is derived from news reports. Or okay, let's try that. Flaw that it fails to consider that one's level of confidence in one's own affects how one perceives reports about the overall state of the economy. Okay, so I want to say, I think this is like a trap answer. It's sort of what I predicted, but it's backwards, because what I predicted was reports about the overall state of the economy affect how one perceives one's own level of confidence. News reports about the state of the economy are not always correct. Okay, let me see how that ties in. News reports about the state of the economy are not always correct. So, okay, the economist's argument is that, basically, to dumb it down, negative coverage does not affect how people's confidence in the economy. Or how much money they spend. Negative news coverage does not affect that. News reports about the state of the economy are not always accurate, so I don't think that's very relevant. People who pay no attention to economic reports in the media always judge accurately. Okay, this is way too strong. People who have little confidence in the overall economy generally take a pessimistic view concerning their own immediate economic situation. It cannot be A. Come on. People who have little confidence in the overall economy generally take a pessimistic view concerning their own immediate economic situations. So first let's figure out exactly what this question is asking. The economist's argument is flawed in that it fails to consider the possibility that, so basically, if these are true, they would undermine his argument, right? Okay, so one side of the argument is bad news coverage in the media causes people to spend less, let's say, right? And this person's saying, no, no. If people are spending less, it's because people's low confidence in their own immediate situation causes them to spend less. I don't think that matters. A or D, A or D. This is not good. One's level of confidence in one's own economic situation affects how one perceives reports about the overall. Okay, let's take it. One's level of confidence in one's own economic situation affects how one perceives reports about the overall state of the economy. I'm gonna go with D, and the reason I'm gonna go with D is because it changed the order up. So here goes personal situation affects the overall state of the economy, or our perception of the overall state of the economy, and this one's a little bit flipped, which is what my original prediction was. That what comes first is your own confidence. No, I'm sorry, not your own confidence. This one is your own confidence. What comes first is your confidence in the overall economy, and then that makes you think that your situation is worse. D or A, D or A. I'm gonna go with D. Shall we just review it right now? Wait, what did, oh, I already, okay, yeah, I guessed on all these. So all these down here that are not, that are darker, I guessed on all of them. These were the ones that I didn't have time to get to at the end, but I got this right. Okay. That is good. How hard was this one? Yeah, okay, this one was hard. Okay, so what was my original prediction? Let me read this again. I don't want to read the explanation first. So some critics of the media have contended that negative news reports on the state of the economy can actually harm the economy. Such reports damage people's confidence in it. This lack of confidence, in turn, adversely affects people's willingness to spend money. Okay, so this guy's saying bad news coverage, people get people lose confidence, and then they spend less money. So bad news coverage, spending less money. But this one says that people look at their people figure out their own confidence in the economy through how they feel about the immediate economic situation, or people's spending is affected by how they view their own personal economic situation. But how do you know that the economic reports aren't tainting people's perception of their own situation? Okay, let's see what they say. Yeah, something that if true, yeah, that's what I said. Something, okay, so that's good. I'm understanding the types of questions. Obviously, this is a flawed question, but I'm understanding how or what type of answer I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that, if true, I originally said would undermine the argument, and that's what this is saying. Where's Nate? Ooh, let's see what he has to say here.
The Economist says some critics of the media have contended that negative news reports on the state of the economy can actually harm the economy because such reports damage people's confidence in it, in the economy. And this lack of confidence, in turn, adversely affects people's willingness to spend money. Some critics believe that. What does this economist actually believe? The Economist says, but studies show that spending trends correlate very closely with people's confidence in their own immediate economic situations. Thus, these media critics are mistaken. Wait a second. Why can't those be the same thing? I mean, where do you get your confidence in your own immediate economic situation? It's from your job. It's from your outlook on, do I like my job? Do I make good money at my job? Do I want to keep my job? Or if you're in school, you get, your immediate economic situation is like, well, am I going to get a job when I graduate? So yeah, you could predict this objection to the Economist. The Economist says media critics have to be wrong. Why? The media critics said bad news about the economy can hurt the economy because people lose confidence in the economy and then they don't want to spend money. This Economist says, no, because spending trends correlate very closely with people's confidence in their own immediate economic situations, as if that's a robust objection, but it's just not, because you could say right back, what if news reports cause me to lose my confidence in my own immediate economic situation?
Okay, yes, and that is sort of what I said, because where do people get this this confidence from? Like, how do I know that my personal economic situation is going well? Like, obviously, if I'm making a lot of money, but what if, like, for example, all this AI stuff that's going around in the news, AI is going to take people's jobs. Let's say I start seeing that, I start thinking about my own personal situation. I might be doing very well, right? Like, on paper, making a lot of money, making more money than I spend. But I'm hearing about this thing that's going to be coming up. And even though I might actually be objectively doing well right now, those news reports make me lose confidence, at least in the future. So yeah, where do I get my confidence from?
I mean, if I saw nothing but, like during COVID, if I saw nothing but the whole world's closing down, there's going to be no business at all, that might have made me want to save money. I mean, I think it, in fact, did make people save a lot of money, at least at first, until the government started giving out money. But it made people tighten up. And so that's, it's a very common sense objection to the Economist, and one that you could maybe have drawn from everyday life. The Economist's argument is flawed in that it fails to consider the possibility that what? So this is, I don't really care whether you want to call this a weekend question or a flawed question. I don't want to be religious about it. I think that it's more properly labeled a weekend question because it says it's flawed in that it fails to consider the possibility that, which now, so it's like, well, you probably failed to consider these 5 things. The real issue is it relevant? So on a flawed question, it would be 2 steps. Did they do it? Is it a problem? On a weekend question, it's just, is it a problem? And here, because that question kind of just, it tees up these answers with, it fails to consider the possibility that. So it's like, well, okay, fine. I mean, you probably didn't consider this. Is this a big deal for you? A, one's level of confidence in one's own economic situation affects how one perceives reports about the overall state of the economy. Close, but nah, because it's backward. If that had said,
yes.
Level of
okay, wow. Okay, beautiful. That's exactly what I said. I said that this was opposite to my prediction, because my prediction would have been how one perceives reports about the overall state of the economy might affect one's level of confidence. Yes, okay, beautiful. So I'm on the same page.
One's own economic situation affects how one perceives reports about the overall state of the economy. Close, but nah, because it's backward. If that had said one's level of confidence in one's economic situation depends on how one perceives reports about the overall state of the economy, it would be perfect. But there's a big difference between depends on and affects. If you picked A, you've got the causal relationship backward. B, news reports about the state of the economy are not always accurate. Fails to consider that possibility, that news reports about the state of the economy are not always accurate. Is that even relevant to the argument?
Yeah.
The argument was like, no, news reports don't matter because it's all about your own personal outlook. Just coming in and saying, like, well, but what if the news reports aren't accurate? I think the Economist would go, yeah, and C, people who pay no attention to economic reports in the media always judge accurately whether their own economic situation is likely to deteriorate or improve. People who pay no attention to economic reports in the media, which I have no idea if that applies to 100% of people or 0% of people. I mean, I guess it can't be 0 if the critics are right, but if C were true, who cares? Like, that's people who don't watch the reports. They're always a good judge, huh? Yeah, but what about people who do watch the reports? Can't them watching the reports cause them to feel poorly about their own immediate economic situation? I think I've already predicted the answer, so hopefully it's still coming. D says, people who have little confidence in the overall economy generally take a pessimistic view concerning their own immediate economic situations. Yeah, that's a very common sense objection. It doesn't use the exact words that I used when I predicted it. But
Yeah.
What if I see these negative reports, I damage my confidence in the economy, and the lack of confidence in the economy in turn adversely affects my willingness to spend money because it makes me think poorly about my own immediate economic situation. That's what he says. He says, hey, it could be both at the same time. The critics don't have to be wrong. You could be right with your premise, Economist, but that just doesn't make the critics wrong. In fact, it could make the critics right. E, an economic slowdown usually has a greater impact on the economic situations of individuals if it takes people by surprise than if they're full born. How is that relevant? We weren't talking about surprises versus things that you knew way in advance. I just don't see why that matters here. I can see, though, why D matters a lot. D is a direct response to the Economist's objection.
Beautiful. Alright, let's look at these as well. just want to see.
The ultimate conclusion is that these critics are mistaken because of that last sentence. Since that's a little abstract, we have to go back and figure out what they thought and what they were mistaken about. What do they think? That the way people act economically is influenced by the media. Okay, I feel like they thought a little bit more than that. What else did they think? Okay, so what did they think? What did the critics think? Oh, okay, so sorry, before we go into what the economists are saying, I just want to focus on what the critics think. Yeah. They think the media makes the economy go down. Negative news reports make the economy go down, and this person is saying, no, they don't really affect the economy because the economy is really affected by what? They're most concerned about their like media circumstances, right? Are we cool with that? So when this guy says they're wrong because people are actually influenced by their individual circumstances rather than the news media, right? This argument is flawed because what could be happening? Exactly. If negative news reports affect how you feel about your individual situation, and how you feel about your individual situation affects the broader economy, then even though the news reports don't affect the broader economy directly, they do affect it indirectly by affecting you, which affects the broader economy. Does that make sense? So, what answers would be? One, levels of confidence in one's own economic situation affects how one perceives reports about the overall economy. It's saying what you think about your situation affects how you view the news, rather than how you view the news affects your situation. Right? If how you view the news affects your situation, and your situation affects the broader economy, then you have a causal chain. This is sort of like flipping that causal chain. Are we okay with that? Okay. Yep. And D is the correct answer.
Yeah.
Answers we're debating. Okay. All right.
Beautiful. I'm very happy about this question. Or about getting this question right. Okay. But it took me like 10 minutes. Jesus Christ, that's not good. Every domesticated large mammal species now in existence was domesticated thousands of years ago. Since those days, people undoubtedly tried innumerable times to domesticate each of the wild, large mammal species that seemed worth domesticating. Since those days, people... Okay, so, they're just stating like a fact right at the very beginning that every domesticated large mammal species now in existence was domesticated thousands of years ago. Okay. Since those days, people undoubtedly tried innumerable times to domesticate each of the wild large mammal species that seemed worth domesticating. So I'm assuming they're going to go into something like, clearly the ones that aren't domesticated aren't worth... Clearly, therefore, most wild large mammal species in existence today either would be difficult to domesticate, would not, okay. Cool. People undoubtedly tried innumerable times to domesticate each of the wild large mammal species that seemed worth domesticating. Clearly, therefore, most wild large mammal species in existence today either would be difficult to domesticate or would not be worth domesticating. Okay, so they're assuming that... And this is tough because I don't think this is a fact. Since those days, people undoubtedly tried innumerable times to domesticate each of the wild large mammal species that seemed worth domesticating. Oh, well, okay, it's assuming that they know that they can judge the worthiness of domesticating an animal. I don't know, like maybe, okay, wolves, let's say, good for hunting, maybe good for protection, but did the people that were domesticating wolves, to turn them into dogs, did they know that they were going to be like man's best friend or something? Or, maybe they didn't know the worthiness of a domesticated animal. That's one thing. Maybe they just didn't try to domesticate them. Okay, this is a good answer. It is not much easier today to domesticate wild than it was in the past. Not all that were domesticated in the past are still in existence. I don't think that matters. The easier it is to domesticate a wild large mammal species, the more worthwhile it is to do so. I'm gonna go with A. Yes, okay, this is yes, okay. If this is a necessary assumption, yes. If this is not true, then the entire argument gets destroyed. Because clearly, therefore, most wild animals in existence today either would be difficult to domesticate or would not be worth domesticating. They're either too difficult or not worthy. Hold on, wait. Since those days, people undoubtedly tried innumerable times to domesticate each of the wild large mammal species that seemed worth domesticating. I have a feeling E has something to do with this. Of all the domesticated animals in existence today, the very first to be domesticated were the easiest to domesticate. Because if let's say this was not true. Oh man. Difficult to domesticate. Or not be worth domesticating. So what because this premise right here only talks about the worthiness of domestication, whereas the conclusion brings up the difficulty and the worthiness. And in this one, of all the domesticated large mammal species, domesticate clearly. I'm gonna go with A because I think this is sort of what I predicted in spite. Yeah, because I was saying they're assuming that every single animal they tried to domesticate. Wait, no, hold on. I think I misread this one. Hold on. So okay, so this is saying that they tried to domesticate the wild animals that seemed worth domesticating. This is saying that they tried to domesticate every single animal they encountered. No. Okay. It is not much easier today to domesticate.
65, section 1, number 18, a zoologist says that every domesticated large mammal species was domesticated thousands of years ago. Since those days, people undoubtedly tried innumerable times to domesticate each of the wild large mammal species that seemed worth domesticating. Clearly, therefore, most wild large mammal species in existence today either would be difficult to domesticate or would not be worth domesticating. No, that's not clear to me. Let's think about something that has not been domesticated. Okay, a lion. Lions are only wild. Lions are not domesticated. What circus lions, obviously. Let's say lions are wild and not domesticated. The fact that that we haven't domesticated lions, it doesn't mean they can't be domesticated today. It also doesn't mean that they're not worth domesticating. I mean, lions are big. That'd be awesome, man. Forget a guard dog. I got a guard lion roaming around your yard. That'd be sweet. And the fact that, so let's say they decided that a lion was worth domesticating. They tried thousands of years ago, or over thousands of years. They tried and failed because it's a lion, and a lion eats the people that are trying to domesticate it. But that doesn't mean that it would be difficult to domesticate today necessarily, because thousands of years ago people did not have science, and today we have science, which means we have drugs, weapons, little clicker devices, spray bottles, whatever you use to train your dog or cat. We have Caesar Milan these days, the dog goes crooked. And so things might have changed, and it could be possible today, as far as I know, it could be possible which would ruin the conclusion of this argument. So the zoologist argument requires the assumption that what? This is a necessary assumption question. One of these five, if false, is going to ruin the argument. A says, in spite of the difficulties encountered, at one time other people have tried to domesticate each wild large mammal. They, let's say, I think it's totally possible that people look at hippos and say, you know what are those things going to do? They eat too much, they're too scary, they smell bad, they just lay around in the mud all day, but we don't need to domesticate a hippo. That doesn't ruin this argument, because the argument said any wild species either was not worth domesticating or too difficult to domesticate. So A does not have to be true. The argument makes sense. B says it is not much easier today to domesticate wild large mammal species than it was in the past. That's the answer, because if it is much easier today to domesticate wild large mammal species, again, because of the internet or spray bottles or Caesar Milan, if it is much easier today to domesticate a lion, then it ruins the conclusion that most large mammal species in existence today either would be difficult to domesticate or not worth domesticating. We might have now science. I mean, electric shock collars are a good example. Internet-enabled electronic shock collars. There's all kinds of shit that we can do today that we weren't able to do 1,000 years ago. And so C is a critical, necessary assumption of the argument. Not C, B is a critical, required assumption of the argument. If B is false, then this argument just doesn't make sense anymore. So the answer is going to be B. C, not all of large mammal species that were domesticated in the past are still in existence. I don't know whether we have allowed domestic species to go extinct or not. I have no idea. I don't see what bearing that has on this argument. D, the easier it is to domesticate a wild large mammal species, the more worthwhile it is. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't see how that's part of the argument. D is just weirdly like lumping those two different possibilities together in a way that is not really what the argument is saying. E, of all the domesticated large mammal species in existence today, the first to be domesticated were the easiest to domesticate. I mean, that might be true, but it just doesn't have to be true. It could be like, oh no, actually we domesticated horses and that sucks. It was really hard, but we did it because they're so useful. That's why we domesticated horses first, even though it would have been much easier to domesticate, some other gerbil or something. Nah, we went with the horses first. It was hard, but it was worth it. So, yeah, the only one here that if false will ruin the argument is E. That's why E is necessary assumption.
A required assumption, necessary assumption. Okay. So, with necessary assumption, you gotta look at the answers, and if the answer were to be false, it would ruin the argument. So, it is not much easier today. Okay. Now, if that was false, if that was not the case, if it was easier today, if it was easier today to domesticate, clearly everyone. Okay. Most. Let me make sure I really understand this. Where is the assumption that well, yeah, I guess he's saying that if an animal is not domesticated, then it's because it's too difficult to do it. But then you say, what do you mean it's too difficult? We have all these new techniques to domesticate animals, so it should be way easier now. It shouldn't be difficult, it should be way easier. So okay, I can see how that ruins the argument. Okay. Last winter was mild enough to allow most bird species to forage naturally. Okay, so it was a pretty easygoing winter. Made it pretty easy for the birds to, survive and look for food. Which explains why the proportion of birds visiting feeders was much lower than usual. Okay, so because the birds were able to find food on their own, they didn't need to go to these artificial bird feeders. The mild winter also allowed many species to stay in their summer range all winter without migrating south. Okay, so we got the ducks here in Illinois. It was a mild winter. That's why I saw ducks literally like a couple weeks ago, just swimming in the water, because the winter has been so mild that they don't need to go anywhere. Thereby limiting the usual attrition accompanying migration. So attrition, like let's say attrition in a job would be the people that come in and leave, so they don't stay. So maybe attrition in this case would be like death. I'm assuming migration for birds, just like migration for humans when we did it, is difficult, and some people don't make it. Hence, last year's mild winter is responsible for this year's larger than usual bird population. Okay. Logic isn't too bad. What could be a flaw in this? Oh, well, let's just look at the question. Which one of the following, if true, would most strengthen the reasoning in this argument? Strengthen the reasoning. No, A would weaken it. Increases in bird population sometimes occur following unusual weather patterns. This is saying that, no, the larger than usual bird population was due wait, hold on. Unusual? Wait. Weaken. Let me look for everything that's going to weaken it first. This would weaken it because, okay, if they don't have any food, then they should be dying more, right? No, because the main argument isn't really about whether or not they go to feeders. The main argument is that the mild winter caused this year's larger than usual bird population. Increases in bird population sometimes occur following up. Yeah, okay, so could you say a mild winter is an unusual weather pattern? Maybe, right? When birds do not migrate south, the mating behaviors they exhibit differ from those they exhibit when they do migrate. Okay, but this is just saying that the mating behaviors differ. But are they saying that they mate more? Because this would strengthen it if it said, when birds do not migrate south, the mating behaviors they exhibit are they exhibit a increase in mating when they do not migrate south. And I think, oh man, I don't know. Dude, if it's B, then okay, because B requires assuming. Okay, they both require assuming two things. This one requires assuming that a mild winter is an unusual weather pattern, and then this one requires assuming that the difference in mating behavior is increased mating when you don't migrate south, right? Or a decrease in mating behavior when you migrate south, either one. So I'm gonna go with A. Because I think last winter was mild enough. Okay. Birds eating at feeders are more vulnerable to predators than birds. I understand. Okay, if most winters are so severe that birds need to be at the feeders, then it's also likely that they're gonna die more because they're in a more vulnerable environment. Versus now, the birds get to forage naturally. They're not as vulnerable to predators, so their population is higher. Yeah, okay, so, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Prep Test 65, Section 1, number 19, says, last winter was mild enough to allow most bird species to forage naturally, which explains why the proportion of birds visiting feeders was much lower than usual. Great, good for them. So, the mild winter also allowed many species to stay in their summer range all winter without migrating south, thereby limiting the usual attrition accompanying migration. Okay, I mean, yeah, if you have to go on like a 2,000-mile journey or whatever, I can see how there might be some hazards along the way. There might be some attrition, meaning birds that don't come back. Hence, last year's mild winter is responsible for this year's larger than usual bird population. So this argument has sort of two prongs to it. It's got the thing about the bird feeders, and then it's got the thing about the migration. The migration part totally makes sense. The winter was mild, the birds did not have to migrate, so we didn't have the attrition due to migration, so the mild winter is a reason why we have more birds this year. That part makes perfect sense. The part that doesn't make sense is the bird feeder part. Why did you bring up the bird feeder part? Well, it says that they could forage naturally, and they didn't have to go to bird feeders, so that's why there's more of them now. Wait, what? What? See, the argument doesn't make sense there, and that's not because I'm stupid, that's because they're stupid. And when the argument doesn't make sense, that's the answer. That's the point of the question, is to tell them that their evidence here doesn't really sensibly connect to their conclusion. Why the bird feeders? What is it about the bird feeder? Oh, you know what? When I'm at my parents' house, they have a bird feeder, and guess what? Their stupid cat parks itself under the bird feeder and eats the birds. Oh, I see. Maybe natural foraging is safer for the birds than bird feeders are, because bird feeders are like a big-ass target for predators. Oh, that would make it make sense. Let's see if that's the answer. Which one of the following appears will strengthen the reasoning in the argument?
Yeah, too, I've seen this
Increases in
question
bird
already.
populations sometimes occur following unusual weather patterns. Doesn't connect to the bird feeder part, doesn't connect to my objection or my question about the argument. I just don't see how that strengthens the argument. Saying sometimes this happens does not mean that it was causally related in this particular case. No, that's a terrible answer. B, when birds do not migrate south, the mating behaviors they exhibit differ from those they exhibit when they do migrate. Well, I don't care about that. I already know that there's less attrition because of migration. I don't care about them when they migrate or when they don't migrate. C, birds eating at feeders are more vulnerable to predators than are birds foraging naturally. Okay, perfect. I mean, I've seen this question before, so maybe it's not really fair that I predicted that answer.
Yeah.
If you would have been curious about this and said, hey, I'm following along with your argument, the second part of your argument makes perfect sense. The first part of your argument about the bird feeders doesn't make sense. Why do you think that the bird feeders, the lack of birds at bird feeders, created a higher population this year? And you might have been able to predict C. If not, you can look at C and you can go, oh, I see. Bird feeders cause attrition. Natural foraging.
But they only mention it one time. Let me see what Brian said.
All right. So what are? All right. So what is the conclusion?
Last year's mild winter is responsible for this year's larger.
Yeah. So the mild winter is responsible. What does that mean?
MW then, I guess.
It's not an if-then statement. It's a causal one, right? It says the mild winter caused what? More birds. I'll just leave it like that. It caused birds. Okay. How many premises did they give in favor of this argument or this conclusion? Okay, one premise was what? Yeah?
They can forage naturally.
Okay, they were able to forage naturally, right? Okay, so one was they were able to forage naturally. Oh, that's great. And what was the other one?
Fewer feeders.
Okay, that's kind of tied into the first one, I think, right? They didn't have to go to the feeders, and thus were able to forage naturally, right? So that's kind of all the same idea.
Stay in the winter range?
They stayed there, right? They stayed. They didn't fly south, right?
I should have put more emphasis on that. Forage naturally. How would that cause a population to increase? Okay, yeah, no, it doesn't make any sense to go from mild winter to more birds, like, unless the birds were in extreme winters or like freezing to death or something. But okay, mild winter. What did the mild winter might have indirectly caused the population to go up, but what directly caused it, right? I should have been asking that question. What directly caused the population to go up? And then that's when you could have said, okay, well, it said that there's less feeders and more natural foraging. Could that have caused the population to go up? How? Why? And then it said less migration. And that's obvious. Okay, less migration means less attrition. Migration journeys are dangerous. So that makes perfect sense, that relationship. But the foraging, wow.
Sound good? So the fact that they didn't fly south, and what does it say about not flying south? The mild winter also allowed many species to stay in their summer range without flying south, thereby limiting the usual attrition. If you prevent people from leaving, is that going to increase the bird population? Yeah, right? The mild winter is responsible for this year's larger than usual bird population. They didn't leave. That would make sense. So I feel like this premise right here does seem to explain the conclusion. It does seem to help the conclusion. Does the first sentence help the conclusion? They were able to forage naturally, therefore there will be more of them. That makes sense? No? Yes?
So I could A because it seemed like the most mild of all of them.
So wait, hold on, I just want to know.
Okay.
Does foraging, we're all cool with this premise supporting conclusion. No? Are we cool with this one?
No, okay.
How does foraging naturally increase the number of birds?
Procreate to eat.
What's the difference between eating in a bird feeder and eating naturally? Oh, really? That's interesting. Oh, you got that from C. Yeah, I have no idea how feeding naturally is any better or likely to increase the population than feeding from a feeder. Right, so right now, how this premise helps the conclusion is a big question mark. This is a classic argument. If one premise helps the conclusion but the other does not, one way to strengthen the argument is to show how the other premise also helps the argument. Further. And answer choice C does that by saying, yeah, because when you forage naturally, you're not killed off. Right? I think that makes sense. You don't have to feeder, like, the point is that answer choice C strengthens the argument by helping one of the premises, which right now is useless, right? Not really doing a whole lot for us. Answer choice A. Do you know why this is wrong at 3 levels?
I was very wrong.
Sorry, Russell, nothing personal. What? Well, damn. Yeah, there are 3 major problems with answer choice A.
3?
Oh, that it wasn't clear. Was it unusual weather? That was mild, but not necessarily
I
unusual.
think
Okay, so sometimes unusual, yeah, I only see 2.
here, I think mild. Okay.
Sometimes.
Well, here, let's start with Russell. You're concerned about the word unusual. I think it's problematic because which unusual weather pattern? Right. This is kind of what you're asking, I guess. When we have unusual weather, is that referring to getting really cold, really warm? Right. It's not really clear. That's one of those. So that's one of the problems. Okay. The other problem is sometimes. What does sometimes mean? At least once. So increases in bird populations have at least once occurred following an unusual weather pattern. It's true. It's true. That's not saying a whole lot, right? What if in the vast majority of cases there is no change in bird population? Right. The last big problem here is that, well, it's even 2 problems, but let's start with one of them. Is answer choice A establishing a correlation? Is it showing that when you have unusual weather, you're more likely to have increasing?
No, this sometimes, yeah, sometimes.
That's the 2 problems. It's not even establishing a correlation, but if it were, it wouldn't matter because that doesn't establish a causal relationship, right? For all we know, that's just a coincidence, or something else is causing both. So A just kind of like starts to tumble down the hill under the spotlight. You guys cool with that? Put it on the spotlight of scrutiny, and then all of a sudden, the answer, I just meant like falling apart. Like it has no merits whatsoever.
I also had a little bit of trouble admittedly knowing what summer range meant. Like, I wasn't sure if that was, like, referring to the space they occupy during the season, or if it was, like, some bird thing that I just don't know about.
I think it's that's what their habitat is. All right, we good with that one now? We're never gonna be tempted by A again? Yeah, A is wrong. Yeah, A is wrong. On the first day of class, you did get some people who were kind of, for conclusion, but okay, got it. Didn't know that. Very good tip. I'm glad I learned that. All right.
A is always wrong.
All right. So what are?
Okay. At least that was like the most chosen wrong answer, right? That means something. Okay. Alright, yeah, I need to finish this. Okay, newspapers generally report on only those scientific studies whose findings sound dramatic. Whose findings sound dramatic. Okay, what? I took this test Sunday, today's Tuesday, okay. I can't be doing that. Furthermore, newspaper stories about small observational studies. Wait, okay, let me start from the beginning. Newspapers generally report on only those scientific studies whose findings sound dramatic. Okay, makes sense, just like the news. Or I guess newspapers are the news, but just like mainstream media. I'm going to report on a story where a cop violently kills someone versus reporting on a story where the cop, I don't know, does something good for the neighborhood. Okay. Furthermore, newspaper stories about small observational studies, which are somewhat unreliable, are more frequent than newspaper stories about large randomized trials, which generate stronger scientific evidence. Okay, so the small observational studies, the findings behind those might sound more dramatic, which is why the newspapers report on them, versus the large randomized trials. They might be better from a scientific perspective. Methods might be better, but they're kind of boring, and we don't think people are going to click to learn about large randomized trials. And they're also probably hard to understand for a regular person that's not scientifically trained. Therefore, that's literally what I just said. Therefore, a small observational study must be more likely to have a dramatic finding than a large randomized trial. Well, one of the flaws is that maybe the reason why people are more inclined to the small observational studies isn't so much because it's more dramatic, but because they're easier to understand than the large randomized trials. So let's see. Okay, so none of these answers for what I predicted. Let's see. Which one of the following most accurately expresses a flaw in the journalist's reasoning? Therefore, a small observational study must be more likely to have dramatic findings than a large. Is it casting doubt on the reliability of the study by questioning the motives of those reporting it? I think it questions or it casts doubt on the reliability of the study by explaining that it's a small, and observational. Um, so it's more so correlation, and it's let's say a small sample size, right? And it's a correlation, so that's pretty weak versus a large, huge sample, randomized trial will produce results that are significant. And by significant, I mean real, replicable, and that's why it's stronger scientific evidence. Therefore, a small observational study must be more likely to have dramatic findings than a large. Okay. I'm going to go no A. It fails to consider that even if a study's findings sound dramatic, the scientific evidence for those findings may be strong. Confuses a claim about scientific studies whose findings sound dramatic with a similar claim. Okay. C is all right. It overlooks the possibility that small obs are far more common than large randomized trials. I like D because that could be a rebuttal. Um, newspapers generally report on only those scientific studies whose findings sound dramatic. Furthermore, newspaper stories about small observational studies, which are somewhat unreliable, are more frequent than newspaper studies about large randomized trials, which generate stronger scientific evidence. Therefore, small observational studies must be more likely to have dramatic findings. Wait, what if there's just more small observational studies? Making it easier to, or making it more likely that newspapers can report on them, right? And this would make sense too, because small observational studies are definitely a lot cheaper to do, and they take a lot less time because all the evidence is already there. You just have to observe and draw a correlation from it, versus like a large randomized trial. You kind of need to start from zero, right? I'm gonna go with D. Yes. Boom. I understand this one.
Prep test 65, section 1, question 20 says, well, a journalist says, newspapers generally report on only those scientific studies whose findings sound dramatic. I think about that for a second and I go, yeah, okay, they're not like really trying to be a scientific journal, they're trying to be a pop newspaper. Sure, I can see why they would only report on stuff that sounds dramatic. Furthermore, newspaper stories about small observational studies, which are somewhat unreliable, are more frequent than newspaper stories about large randomized trials, which generate stronger scientific evidence. Okay, so that sounds bad. Why are you frequently publishing stories about small observational studies, which might not be as good of science as these large randomized trials? Therefore, a small observational study must be more likely to have dramatic findings than a large randomized trial. Not necessarily.
Okay, what did I predict? Or what was my reply to that? My reply was that no, I agreed. No, not necessarily. Maybe the small observational studies are a lot easier to understand. They're a lot more interesting. Maybe the interest comes from the drama, but they're engaging, more comprehensible, easier to understand. Those are my objections to it. It wasn't so much maybe there's just more of them.
The problem is, yeah, I can predict the answer here. I'm going to pretend I can. I'm looking for a flaw in the reasoning, okay? Ideally, you would take a moment to figure it out, but here I can see how it might be a little difficult to predict it, so I'll pretend I can't predict it. A, so I'm looking for something that the argument did, and it's a problem. So A, it casts doubt on the reliability.
Wait, something that the argument did, and it's a problem?
Of a study by questioning the motive. No, it did not question anyone's motives. A cannot be the answer because that is something that the journalist's argument did not do. B.
Yeah, okay, well, it didn't question the motives of the people publishing the studies, but it did question the motives of the newspaper reporting on the study or including it in its news.
It fails to consider that even if a study's findings sound dramatic, the scientific evidence for those findings may be strong. It didn't bring that up, but it doesn't need to bring that up because that's beside the point. So it did fail to consider this fact, that even if a study's findings sound dramatic, the evidence might be strong.
But it's not an issue.
But who cares about that? That's not a problem with the logic here, so the answer is not B. So A is not the answer because they didn't do it. B is not the answer because it's not a problem. C, it confuses a claim about scientific studies whose findings sound dramatic with a similar claim about small observational studies. What? Did it confuse two different claims? I don't remember it confusing two different claims. It didn't do that. Not C. D, it overlooks the possibility that small observational studies are far more common than large randomized trials. Oh. It did overlook that possibility. It didn't mention that. And that possibility, that small observational studies are far more common than large randomized trials, that's a problem because that would be an alternative reason for why there are more newspaper stories about the small observational studies. It's just because, according to D, what if there's just more of these small studies to begin with? What if there's 1,000 of these small studies for every one large randomized trial? In that case, the small studies don't have to have more frequent dramatic findings. In fact, they could have less frequent, more dramatic findings, but there's just so many more of those studies that it would generate more news. The argument did overlook this possibility. This possibility is a problem, and that's why the answer is going to be D. E, it fails to rule out the possibility that a study having findings that sound dramatic is an effect rather than a cause of the studies being reported on. I don't care what's cause and what's effect. I care that newspapers generally report only on those studies whose findings sound dramatic. That's a fact. So E then is irrelevant. Which is causing which, it doesn't matter. It's just a fact that they only do this. The answer is D because they did it and it's a problem.
Okay. In several countries to slow global warming, many farmers are planting trees on their land because of government incentives. These incentives arose from research indicating that vegetation. Well, okay, I'm not even paying attention to what I'm reading. Hold on. In several countries, to slow global warming, okay, many farmers are planting trees on their land because of government incentives. Okay, the government's probably giving them some money, giving them some tax breaks to plant trees. Okay. These incentives arose from research indicating that vegetation absorbs carbon dioxide, yes, that might otherwise trap heat in the atmosphere. Okay, so it makes sense. A recent study, however, indicates that trees absorb and store carbon dioxide less effectively than native grasses. Therefore, these incentives are helping to hasten global warming, hasten to speed up. Okay. And I only know that because of the haste spell in Clash of Clans. What time is it? 8:52. Okay, I'm gonna put a timer for 8 minutes. Okay. Therefore, these incentives are helping to hasten global warming. Maybe, right? I don't know if, no, maybe not hasten. Maybe they're not helping to combat global warming as effectively and efficiently as the native grasses could be, but I don't see how they could be, like, increasing global warming or increasing it at a faster rate than, like, not planting trees. Like, even if the trees are inefficient, like, let's say the natural grasses absorb 80% of carbon dioxide, and then the trees only absorb 40%, so it's half of it. They're still doing something. It's better than nothing, and can't be increasing it. Requires the assumption that most farmers do not plant any trees on their land unless there is an incentive to do so. No, I don't think so, because no. Irrelevant. That might be relevant. Irrelevant. One that has been deforested seldom later sustains native grasses. Absorb and store current less effectively. Yeah, okay. I think that would make sense, because if trees not only absorb carbon dioxide less efficiently, but then they're also emitting it because they don't store it as effectively, right? If they don't store it as effectively, what does that mean? That they're releasing it. No, it's D. It has to be D, because who cares about this? They already admitted that, right? D. Yeah. Boom. Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. Let's just listen to okay, it's just Brian. Let's just listen to Brian. I don't know why people like these written explanations so much, but I'll read it, I guess. I prefer the video. Okay, this is, so the argument says that trees are being planted so because it sounds good, probably true. Moving on. These trees, though, aren't as good at CO2 removal as native grasses. So a tree can remove a pound of CO2 and the correlative is over 2 pounds. By the way, these numbers are just something interesting what I'm reading. They're totally made up. Yep, that's exactly what I did. How does the author conclude that planting trees is actually going to hurt the effort system? Doesn't seem like even if the grass is... Yeah, okay, that's exactly what I said. According to the information we have here, what's the one way planting a tree would actually be counterproductive in our efforts? Yeah, okay, so I should have been able to better predict this.
Test 65, Section 1, Question 21. In several countries, to slow global warming, many farmers are planting trees on their land because of government incentives. All right, so they're being paid maybe to plant trees on their land, and that's going to help with global warming. I guess that kind of makes sense. These incentives arose from research indicating that vegetation absorbs carbon dioxide that might otherwise trap heat in the atmosphere. None of that is surprising to me. I feel like we kind of know that plants are good for taking in CO2. A recent study, however, okay, so here's where the change comes in, or the twist. A recent study, however, indicates that trees absorb and store carbon dioxide less effectively than native grasses. All right, so if trees are less effective than native grasses, what can we conclude so far? If you want to slow down global warming, you should probably not plant trees, you should plant native grasses. That's all I can think of right now. But then this next sentence is therefore. So this person is going to conclude something on the basis of that. These incentives are helping to hasten global warming. That's a little bit much, right? Like, okay, they're not doing the best thing. They're doing trees instead of native grasses. Therefore, things are going to get worse. They're just not going to get as good as they could have been. Unless, the only way for this is a weird argument. It seems like a jump to get to this conclusion. In any case, the argument requires the assumption that, so this is a necessary assumption question. It's asking me for something that the author absolutely has to agree with. If the author doesn't agree with the correct answer, then the argument is going to fall apart. So for some reason, this person thinks that the trees are actually hurting, even though I still think they would help somewhat.
Okay, that makes sense, because let's assume that all the trees that are being planted were being planted where there was no native grass. So all it does is make the situation better. It doesn't hurt it. But if I'm actively removing native grass, if I'm actively removing something that is amazing to put in something that's mediocre, yeah, that'd make it worse.
And so I need something in here about the trees hurting in some way. Okay, hey, trees not only absorb carbon dioxide, but also emit it. Okay, well, I don't think you have to agree with this. You could just think that trees, I don't know, are absorbing less carbon dioxide than they maybe than what could have been there. So I don't know if this has to be true. B, most farmers do not plant any trees on their land unless there is an incentive to do so. We already know that the farmers are doing this. We just know about it's true for many farmers. We don't have to assume that this is true for most farmers. So not necessary. C, land that has been deforested seldom later sustains native grasses. You don't need to make any assumptions about what happens to deforested land. We're talking about putting trees on. If anything, this would help the argument. In the sense, it's like it's weird. It's talking about a scenario. We're talking about people foresting. They're putting trees on. So doesn't look like most people are thinking about this. D, some of the trees planted in response to incentives are planted where native grasses would otherwise be growing. Oh, okay. This actually makes a lot more sense. If we think that the trees are actually hurting global warming, then this person must be assuming that the trees are replacing the native grasses. So it was more effective before, and now the trees are coming in and they are taking out some carbon dioxide, but not as effectively, right? So yeah, this is actually what the person is assuming. Few, if any, governments have been interested in promoting the growth of native grasses. We don't care how many have been interested or not interested. For all we know, all of them are interested. The point here is that they just didn't have a good plan. It doesn't mean they're not interested. Okay, so D is the correct answer. It looks like most people are tempted by that. Questions? Notice we're asking ourselves what must be true. Does this have to be assumed? And this is something that the author has to agree with because that's why they think the trees are actually hurting, because they're replacing something that's more effective. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so does that mean by many farmers being mentioned in the premises? And the answer choice does not say many farmers would therefore be automatically wrong. No, not necessarily. But the question in a necessary assumption question is, does the author have to agree with this? So the author told us that many farmers are planting trees on their land because of these incentives. And then B comes in and says, okay, well, then you must believe that most farmers do not plant any trees on their land unless there is an incentive to do so. The author...
Alright, I got 4 more. Alright. Oh, no. I don't want to see that. Alright, we're done. How long have we been live? Okay, about an hour. I would say this was a very productive hour. I did 5 questions. Let's see, how many did I get right? So 1. E. Okay, so 3 out of 5. And these were all 4. Okay, this one was a 3. Okay. These are all either a 4 or a 5. So, number 4. I got that one right. It was number 17 was level 4. I got right. This one. wrong, wrong, correct. Okay. So I got 1 4 and 1 5, right? 2 5s wrong. Okay, cool. Alrighty.